Hello, welcome Neil. I don't think Neil needs any introduction. And yes, today we're gonna hear about the estimating business application from Neil. And if you're not following Neil's blog, customary blogs, probably you're missing lots of key information or key details around estimation and agile. So I suggest strongly go and check out Neil's blog. And without further ado, let me hand over to Neil. I'm a big fan of his blogs. So that's why I was just talking about his blogs.
Thanks, Hugh.
Thanks, Neil. To you.
Some of the sessions, folks have had their camera on, others have had it off. What do you prefer?
Yeah, please feel free to turn on, keep it on.
It's good to go. You can see. There we go. You can see how sunny it is in Brisbane, Australia. Welcome, everybody. Wish I was there with you in New Zealand. I was there in 2020, I think, for it must have been 2019 for the Business Application Summit. My wife and I visited Auckland one weekend. Wish I could be there, but all the way from Australia, I'm going to bring you a session on estimating business applications. It's a topic close to my heart, and I'm going to share a couple of stories with you to get started. Okay. I've just noticed in PowerPoint Live, my custom font isn't rendering. So that $2 million projects should be in a different font. So we're going to have some fun with the layout of some of these slides, but bear with me. So I've run a couple of businesses. One of them is Superware, which helps Microsoft customers with complex stakeholder relationships build business applications, really to manage those complex stakeholder relationships. We've just won 2 projects, each worth over $1 million that will deliver over the next 6 to 9 months, which is massive for us, absolutely huge. And we used the estimation techniques I'm going to show you in this session today to win both of those projects. And when I look back on those projects and I think about how much discovery work we did, it really wasn't much at all. You know, in the olden days, I would have spent months in discovery, writing specs and designs and all this kind of stuff. Really, for both of these opportunities, we spent a few hours in discovery with these customers. We had a couple of meetings, a couple of workshops. In fact, for one customer, they were a government customer and you weren't allowed to meet them at all. All we had was the requirement spec that they sent us. You're not allowed to talk to them. So if you're interested in how your team could quickly, accurately, and confidently estimate projects like that and win them, then you're in the right place. Well, welcome aboard. My name is Neil Benson. So I run 2 businesses, Customary, which is my online academy where I help business applications professionals build amazing agile business applications through my online courses and coaching. And then I have Superware, which is my Microsoft partner business, which does implementation work as well. Feel free to connect with me. You can also subscribe to my podcast, my YouTube channel. Hit me up on LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever you like. I've published about 130 episodes of the Amazing Applications podcast. You can find that on all good podcast players. And if you've got an interesting story to share or something you could teach, then I'd love to have you on the podcast. We get between 300 and 500 downloads per episode. So, you know, it's enough to fill a big conference room. Come and share your story and people would love to hear it. Or if you can recommend any guests or topics, get in touch. I also have a course called Estimating Business Apps. And if you stick around to the end, I'll tell you how you can get onto the paid version of the course for free, just for attending the New Zealand Business Apps Summit. But there's a free tier with 3 sections in it, and there's another 2 tiers that are paid. But for attending today, you can get the paid stuff for free. It's got all the good advanced content in there. So there's 2 questions that every business applications professional gets asked before they start a project. And if you haven't been asked yet, then go and ask somebody in pre-sales because they get asked every day. How much is this thing going to cost and how long is it going to take? 2 questions we get all the time. To answer those 2 questions accurately requires an uncanny ability to predict the future. I don't have that ability. I don't know about you, maybe you do, but I bet you my crystal balls are smaller than your crystal balls. The software industry is renowned for being pretty crap at answering those 2 questions. In fact, we're regarded nearly as badly as the construction industry. Hope nobody here is doing business apps for construction. That would be worst of both worlds. The thing is that our stakeholders, they want us to answer those two questions. They need us to answer those two questions. And frankly, I think they deserve the answers to those two questions. I don't think anybody in their right mind would approve a business applications project if we couldn't tell them what the timeline and budget were going to look like. Our stakeholders have got business cases to make. They've got investment committees to persuade, and sometimes they've got penny pinching paper pushers to appease. And if it was your business or my business, I wouldn't approve a significant digital transformation or any kind of business applications endeavor without really understanding how long it's going to take and how much it's going to cost. So I don't expect my stakeholders to do that either. Is there a better approach than estimating? Well, there are some agile practitioners who tell you that there is. In fact, I had one of them on my podcast, Vasco Duarte. He's one of the authors in a movement called No Estimates. And their approach is to build a few features. Then, using the data that they've collected by building a few features, they can use probabilistic forecasting to build a prediction of how long it's going to take and how much it's going to cost to build the rest of the features, which is awesome. That strikes me as a more scientific way, as a better way of doing it. We're using empirical data. Trouble is, we don't have any data. You're in a pre-sales opportunity environment. You haven't done any work for this customer. A team might have never worked together. You might be building a completely novel application that's never been built before, so you don't have a lot of experience with solving this particular challenge. So what do? Most of us are Microsoft partners, but even if you're a customer, somebody's going to ask you how long it's going to take and how much it's going to cost. So we can't do this probabilistic forecasting. We need to rely on something else, which is estimating. I think estimating is an essential activity, but how valuable is it? Well, I've never heard anybody say, oh, I wish I'd spent 4 times longer estimating this project. It's a valuable activity, but we want to minimize the amount of time it takes to get to that useful, accurate estimate that our stakeholders can use to support their decisions, and so that we can get on doing fun stuff of actually building the software applications that our users love. Good thing about estimating is that it has some benefits, had some side benefits that my teams have experienced, and one of those, the best one, is probably the shared understanding that we get by discussing the requirements, hopefully with the customer. We build a note of all of our assumptions. We maybe have a design idea in mind when we're creating estimates. We also get different perspectives. We're not doing estimating on our own. We don't have a senior developer or an architect doing the estimation, not in the method I'm going to show you. We have a diverse range of people. We have a development team with analysts, app makers, professional developers, testers, architects, also all sorts of people, the DevOps folks, everybody that we need to take an idea and put it into production. That makes our estimates a lot more robust because all of those different perspectives get to weigh in. And the team begins to buy in. If the team that's doing the estimating is later on the team that does the delivery, well, now they're invested in the estimates. They estimated them. They have some knowledge of the requirements, and they're on the hook for those estimates. So it begins to get some buy-in from the team, which is great too. So I'm going to share with you my method for quickly, accurately, and confidently answering those 2 little questions. How much is it going to cost? How long is it going to take? The estimation method I'm going to share with you today is called story point estimation. It's a proven alternative. At least I've had 10 years working with it, and it's worked for me. And I think it's a better alternative than the traditional method of analysis in advance and all that upfront design. Like I said, we just won 2 projects. I've won heaps of projects with this method, but 2 in the last few weeks while preparing a session for you today. So just goes to show you. The old way of doing estimation looks a lot like this. So first of all, we do all of our analysis in advance, and we spend weeks or even months interviewing people, analyzing lots of artifacts and documentation, process modeling. We figure out what everyone needs. We write all that down in as much detail as possible, because if you forget or get something wrong, there's going to be a nasty change request later. It's going to come back and bite you in the bum. Then we take all those requirements and we get an architect or a senior developer to come up with a design. What are the apps that we're going to use? What tables and forms and screens and columns and views and buttons and Canvas apps and plugins and add-ons and integrations are going to be required. Then we have to pile in data migration and all the integration that we need and what kind of Azure services we might use. Then there's the non-functional stuff as well, like how are we going to meet the customer's requirements for performance and usability and storage and operational requirements and maintainability and supportability and all that kind of stuff as well. We specify all of that in a lot of detail and ask the customer to sign off on it. Customers, no idea what we're talking about. They've probably never done a Power Platform project before, and they might sign it, but I bet you they don't really understand it. And of course, we're going to change it all anyway once we get into the requirements and things change. Finally, we lay all of that out in a Gantt chart that specifies all the tasks and the dependencies. There's 15-minute increments of estimation and in time. The resources are all there, and we have lots of dependencies and a critical path that shows us how long the project's going to take. And what's the result of all of that? Well, you might think it's a perfectly accurate plan and we're off and all we need to do is execute the plan. What's the result in real life? Well, it's got really cut off. Sorry about this. 75% of projects are delivered within 25% of the original estimates. So 3/4 of projects are are massively late and over budget. And that doesn't include the projects that get cancelled halfway through because they're so far behind. Particularly in government projects, we see that quite a bit. So that's from Steve McConnell, a well-known author. He's done quite a bit of work. He's an expert on software estimation, and he's done quite a bit to debunk some of the no estimate stuff. I think no estimates is great, but it's really hard if you don't have the empirical data. I think there's lots of reasons why projects blow out all the time. In fact, there's a few laws dreamt up by software estimation academics, but they're quite handy. Some of them are quite funny. Parkinson's law, which says that work expands to fill the time available for its completion, which if you've ever tried to pack to go on holiday and you've got a couple of hours to pack a suitcase, it works. You manage to fit everything in. Or if you've got a couple of days, well, it takes a couple of days to pack your suitcase. So Parkinson's law describes that phenomenon. Hofstadter's law, one of my favorites. Things always take longer than you expect, even when you take into account Hofstadter's law. Things are more complex than you initially anticipate. Berard's law 13, I don't know what his other 12 laws are, but he said walking on water and developing software against a written specification are easy, as long as both are frozen. Humphrey's law, which is one that my wife has taught me, the user doesn't know what she wants. Sorry, my wife and I just went through a renovation recently, so this is one's a bit close to my heart. The user doesn't know what she wants until she sees your first attempt. Ziv's law, Ziv said that the requirements can never be fully understood when we're building complex systems. Wegner's lemma, Wegner had a similar way of describing it. He said an interactive system can never be fully specified, nor can it ever be fully tested. Always going to find bugs in production. There's a couple of other things that impact our projects and our estimates in particular. One of those I call executive wild dreams. This is when someone pretty high up the chain with probably little to no experience building business applications doesn't really grasp the requirements, decrees that the project must be done by a certain date or within a certain budget, usually not enough budget, and the deadline is a very short time from now, and throws your estimates out the window. Or competitive pressure, which is when your delivery team's expert knowledge gets squeezed by a well-meaning but ultimately misguided sales team who slash the team's budget or estimates in order to meet the customers. I know you said it was going to take 9 months, but we told the customer you could do it. Stick your hand up if you've ever been there. Outside estimators, I don't want to throw shade at architects any more than I already have, but sometimes architects are solely responsible for coming up with our estimates, and they're not going to be part of the delivery team. So now when the delivery team, find unknown complexity, they get the blame for the architect's misguided estimate, which I think is pretty unfair. And then the last one is requirement stuffing. This is when something critical, new comes up, usually towards the end of the project, and the stakeholder or the sponsor says, got to do it. It's an absolutely essential requirement. It's just come out of the blue. But the deadline's not going to change. The budget's not going to change. You've just got to squeeze it in. Those are some of the phenomena I've seen affect software projects as well. Using story point estimation, I think we can handle those. I just want to reflect for a moment on why estimating in units of time doesn't work. A lot of us are comfortable estimating in hours or days, and those are great for invoicing, but please don't let your accounting department's invoicing preference wag the tail of the dog and tell your delivery team how to estimate or what units to use for estimation. My teams still invoice in hours, but we estimate in story points. Invoicing in hours makes sense. We know exactly who turned up and for how long and what that commitment was that week or that sprint. So continue to use it for invoicing, but try not to use it for estimating. There are 4 common problems estimating in time. Let's take a quick look at these. Oh, sorry about my layout. Barely readable. What it says is my day is not equal to your day. I don't know if you've ever had someone like Rami on your team, but Rami is a developer extraordinaire, and he can get way more done in a day than I can. So if Rami estimates it's going to take 8 hours, but I'm the one who ends up picking up that piece of work, well, I can't get it done in 8 hours. His day is not the same as my day. And so, 2 weeks later, I rock up and the thing is built. Our estimates are shot at that point. So what are you going to do if you've got superstars like Rami or Jiva on your team? You're going to have a hard time when not all your developers are rock stars like those guys. So we don't want to have them estimating for the rest of the team. And opposite way it works as well. If I say it'll take 4 days and Jiva can get it done in half an hour, because he can use Power Automate, and I was thinking of a Logic app. Well, that's going to throw out our estimates as well. What some teams do is come up with this idea of an average developer, which I think just takes a bad guess and makes it worse, because now what I do is I go, well, I'm worse than average. So I will imagine that I could get it done in 2 days, but an average developer could do it in 1 day. Jiva's thinking I could get it done in half a day, but I'll reduce my estimate to 1 day to counteract this average developer idea. And we've just got all this fudge factor in the middle. Don't do that either. It doesn't work. Like I said, all we've done is take a bad guess and make it worse. Time-based estimates are also really fragile. Imagine halfway through your project, your investments in release automation in Azure DevOps or test automation begin to pay off. And all the time-based estimates you've factored into your project about how much effort it's going to take to do deployment to production every sprint, or how much time you'll have to spend doing manual test execution, are out the window, because now you've got all this automation that has really reduced that time down to a fraction. You're going to have to re-estimate all your requirements, because those time-based estimates for that effort are out the window. You're going to have to do it all again. So you're going to have to spend more time in estimation. With story point estimation, you're not impacted if those kind of investments pay off. Use something called velocity, and velocity will just go up and your estimates will stay the same. This is actually down to the fact that time-based estimation is an absolute, discrete estimate, whereas what we're going to do with story points is relative estimation. So we're just comparing the effort involved in 2 different requirements. Time-based estimates quite often forget about waiting time. As a developer, have you ever been stuck waiting for a business analyst to clarify a requirement with one of your stakeholders, or waiting for a sysadmin to set up a service account, or approve maybe an architecture review board has got to wait for them to approve your design, or you might have IT or security has got to approve a third-party tool. I want to use the XRM toolbox, but I can't install it on my local machine that the customer's asked me to do on my development node. So that kind of waiting time quite often gets forgotten when we're doing our time-based estimates. We always just seem to think about the time spent on the task and forget about the actual elapsed time that's going to be involved. And then we've got things like ideal days and all these kind of fudge factors to take account for that. The customer says, well, why is an ideal day not the same as a real day? And all sorts of discussions. So if estimating in time doesn't work, an alternative used by some teams is to estimate in T-shirts. And in order to keep within our time box today, I'm not going to go into that, but you can find a video in my free course about why estimating in T-shirts doesn't work either. What I'm going to share with you is a story about trail running, how my wife and I enjoy trail running, and how I think if you're stuck on what story points are, how to use them, hopefully this trail running analogy will work for you. So my wife and I enjoy trail running. That's Natasha. She's much fitter and faster than I am. 10 years ago, I was running ultra marathons and also trail running, but today she's a lot faster. One of the places that I was going to say we love running, she loves running, she does it twice, 2 or 3 times a week, is Mount Cootha, which is getting a big hill or a small mountain on the edge of Brisbane. And one of her favorite runs there is the Powerful Owl, or the Cootha Loop via the Powerful Owl Trail. When last time we went out to run it, I said, how long will it take? And she said, it'll take about an hour. Actually, it took us 1.5 hours. Well, what happened? So she's an experienced trail runner. She knows all the trails around Mount Cootha. And when I asked her to estimate it, she gave me a time-based estimate of 1 hour, just like a lot of business apps professionals do when we're asked for an estimate. Another approach she could have taken is to compare the difficulty of the Powerful Owl Trail to all the other trails we've run together. So the Powerful Owl Trail distance is about 8 kilometers, which is about how fast Natasha runs a trail. So she runs at about 8 kilometers an hour on a trail. I'm kind of 6 or 7 when it's flat, so I'm not as fast as her. And this is not a flat trail. It's about 278 meters of elevation, and it's a little bit difficult. There's a couple of streams you got to jump over. There was some recent rain, so it was a bit bogged down in some places. But no wonder it took us an hour and a half. If Natasha had told me it's an 8, but it has some steep climbs, a couple of creeks, and there's mud, we would have adjusted that 8 up to something like a 13. We would have adjusted the distance for the difficulty. So if I take the Kokoda track, it's also Mount Cootha, it's slightly longer, it's 10 kilometers, but it's a lot steeper. There's some really steep sections you're running effectively on the crest of this ridge, and it's a lot more strenuous, or the difficulty is categorized as strenuous. So if the Powerful Owl was a 13, then the Kokoda, we could agree, is a 20. So that's all story points are. They are a generic unit that we can use for estimating the relative size of 2 things, pieces of work. Let's unpack what we mean when we say size. Most of what makes up the size of a requirement is the effort that's going to take to do the analysis and to do the design and testing and deployment and validation and documentation, whatever else you need to do to get that thing into production. Didn't we just say that effort shouldn't be measured in units of time? Well, yes. So what we're going to do is adjust the time-based estimate for difficulty. That's what this trail running scale does as well. What we see with requirements is risk, uncertainty, and complexity that affect how long it's going to take. So risks could include merger and acquisition activity within your customer's organization. If they get bought or they buy another business, or there's the government flags changes in the regulations or the legislation that might affect the customer's industry, or there's a new competitor emerges, or there's changes in the leadership, or you have a dependency on another team, which quite often is a risk that affects a lot of our work. Maybe you've got an integration team that is building APIs for you, and you've got to wait for those APIs. Consume them. Uncertainty could include, well, we're not quite sure about the volume of the processes, or how many variants there are, how many branches there are in a process, or how much data we need to migrate, or what number of products we need to build out in a catalog for our customer. Complexity could include, well, we don't know what we're going to do for the business rules engine. We might buy one, we might have to build one. We're not sure what the procurement strategy is going to look like. Or the customer has got a desire to use the new subscription billing engine in Dynamics 365 Finance. I've never used that before. Okay, well, there's bound to be some complexity in there. So we'll account for that somehow. So if something is going to impede your work, it doesn't really matter whether you call it a risk, certainty, complexity, an obstacle, an issue, an inhibitor, a blocker. You just need to factor it in. And so what we're going to do is use an estimation scale. And this is the first thing our team is going to do. We only need to do this once for our project. And if you're a Microsoft partner, you might be able to agree an estimation scale across your entire practice for all your projects, something I would encourage you to do. I don't recommend choosing a scale like 1 to 100. Having every number in that kind of centigrade scale is too many. There's 2 laws that say why that doesn't work. Hicks' law is the first one. Hicks' law says the more choices you have, the longer it takes to choose. Makes sense. And remember, we said we don't want to spend any more time estimating after. Again, Tasha used to work for GlaxoSmithKline in the consumer goods business where they made toothpaste. And their mission was to take one toothpaste type off the shelf when they wanted to launch a new one. So they take off an underperformer and launch a new product into the market. Because consumers told them nobody wants to spend more time choosing toothpaste. Sorry, is there a question there? All right, charge on. The second law that says that we shouldn't have a big scale is Weber's law. It was actually coined by a psychophysicist called Gustav Fechner, who said that is the reliably detectable difference between 2 weights is about 5%. And it's the same with requirements. If we have a scale that allows our developers to choose a 50 or 51, well, the difference between those is only 2%. So can't really estimate that accurately when you look at a requirement. So taking into account those 2 factors, there are 2 popular scales. The first one is called the powers of 2 scale, and it's pretty simple. You just take the number 1, you start with number 1 and double it every time. So 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, you can keep going. 32, 64, 128, 256, 1024. Welcome to use the powers of 2 scale. My teams have actually never used it. We prefer a different scale called the modified Fibonacci scale. So let me share with you what the modified Fibonacci scale is, how we use it, and why we use it. For the modified Fibonacci scale, the next number in the sequence is the sum of the previous 2. 1, 2, 3, 5, 8. Really nice scale that we use for estimating user stories. Think about requirements. I think about stories, features, and epics. Different teams chunk them up in different ways. Depends whether you use Azure DevOps or Jira, typically. If you're estimating features and epics, I like this scale, so it's just a continuation, 13, 20, 40, 60, and 100. And you can see why it's the nickname modified Fibonacci, because 8 and 13 together actually make 21, so we've started modifying it. Explain why that. You can keep going. If you want to estimate modules or big components, or even a portfolio of small applications, you could keep going with this modified Fibonacci scale, 200, 300, 500, 800, 1300. Really good if your customer has a big portfolio of small apps. So I like this small range for user stories, and I don't use a true Fibonacci scale when I'm estimating epics and features. I use this modified one instead. And the reason is because numbers like 34 give our customer the illusion of precision. 34 sounds pretty precise to them. It's not 33, it's not 35. How do we arrive at 34? If I say 40, and just say, look, we use a round number, we round in tens, so we go 13, 20, 40, 60, 100. It's also easier to add up. Got lots of cards that are 10. Next, I want to talk about slicing stories. So this is the first step that we need to do to prepare our backlog for estimation. I want to talk about backlog here. I'm not talking about an entire project. You can take the advanced section of my course if you want to find out how we estimate entire projects. But I'm talking here about a set of user stories. There might be 20 or 30 or 40 user stories that we're thinking about over the next couple of sprints or the first release. First thing we need to do is to slice them up into the right size. Requirements that are too small have just too much management overhead relative to the value. Adding a column, changing the color of a button, just wrap all those up, combine those into bigger user stories so that they're at least a 1 or 2 points. a couple of hours of work where we can justify releasing them. On the other hand, what we really refer to with slicing is slicing up stuff that's too big. We want to slice up bigger stories into smaller ones because big stories have got too much uncertainty, risk, and complexity. And I quite often find anything bigger than an 8 for my team, we take a 13-point story into a sprint, we might be able to finish it, but the chances are that something's going to bite us in the middle of the sprint. We also like to have a nice linear burn down. And if we have too many big stories, just get this flat line for 1.5 weeks in the sprint, and then everything starts to finish at the end, and the poor testers get hammered with all these big stories to test towards the end of the sprint. So what's small enough? Well, my teams like to get at least 10 stories done in every sprint. So hopefully that helps you get some kind of sense. And we'll talk in a minute about velocity. So who's responsible for splitting the stories? Well, our product owner always remains accountable for the product backlog, and she can split the stories herself. But in my projects, in my Dynamics 365 and Power Platform, it's typically we have one of the developers who is an experienced business analyst who's managing the backlog on behalf of the. He's accountable, but the business analyst is responsible. Next step for our team is to agree a standard story. Standard story is just the one that we're going to compare all the other stories in our backlog against the standard to do that relative estimation. So we want to take a story that is valuable, it's near the top of the backlog, it's well understood by both the product owner and by the developers. So it's going to have acceptance criteria, and we've discussed it, and we're all pretty comfortable with the effort or the work that's going to be required to deliver it. And it's low risk. It's been well elaborated. It's got low likelihood of changing. And it's kind of the Goldilocks size. So it's not too big and not too small. And we can get 10 stories, or the team feels like they could get at least 10 stories done like that in every sprint. I call the standard story a 3-point story. Call it a 2 or 1, doesn't really matter. You start off with, yep, that feels like a 3. And anything that's a lot less effort, based on our risk adjustment, would be a 1. Anything that's a little bit less effort would be a 2. Anything that's a little bit more would be a 5. And anything that's a lot more would be. If it's bigger than an 8, like I said, we're going to. An advanced technique that you can do is, rather than have just a 3-point standard story, you could have a standard story for every unit in your estimation scale. So you could have a standard 1-point, and a standard 2-point, 3 and 5 and 8-point user stories, and print them up, stick them on the wall if you're in person, put them in a wiki or SharePoint where somebody can find them easily, especially for a new developer onboarding into your team, and say, requirements like this one, these sizes. Helps the team accelerate their estimation. There's 2 techniques then. Once you've agreed your standards, there are 2 techniques for estimating the rest of your backlog. The first of those is called affinity estimation. My teams use this occasionally, not too often, but it's a really useful technique when you've got a lot of requirements to estimate. Sorry, these text doesn't quite fit in my post-it notes. Take a whiteboard, either a physical or a virtual one, add 5 columns or however many numbers you have in your estimation scale. In this example, it's 1, 2, 3, 5, and 8. We've got our standard story in the 3-point column, which is case submission. And then we'd have a small backlog here of unestimated user stories that we want. First developer is going to come along, take the first card and put it in the column that she thinks represents the risk-adjusted effort for meeting that requirement. Case routing is a 5. Don't discuss it, just place it on the board. It's an example of what my friend Hamish Shield would say is working together alone. So we're working as a group, but these estimations are done silently on your own. Next developer takes the next story and places it where she thinks it's going to go. In this case, it's a case evaluation is a 2, and so on. So we work through the backlog, each developer in turn placing the items where estimates go. Then we can spend a few minutes changing stuff around. So we can have a discussion at this point, maybe 30 seconds or a minute tops, involve the product owner if we need to, but we've already discussed these requirements, so we should have a fairly good understanding as a team, but we can make some compromises and be aware. Affinity estimation works really well. Like I said, when you've got a lot of user stories, you want to estimate them quite quickly. If you find that the alternative techniques I'm going to show you in a second takes too long, try this one. So it's really good if you've got a release or an entire project and you need to estimate huge backlogs. Affinity estimation tools, like I said, it nothing particularly special. You can get away with index cards or sticky notes on a wall, or a virtual tool or collaborative tool like Miro or Mural, or maybe even Microsoft Whiteboard at a pinch. The next technique I'd like to share with you is planning poker. Much more popular. It's one that my teams use a lot. Evolved out of the 1960s from an estimation method called wideband Delphi. Here's how it works. Somebody in the team, usually the product owner, maybe the scrum master, or perhaps even the developer who's acting as a business analyst, will pick up one of the stories and describe it to the team. Then the team's got an opportunity to ask a few clarifying questions if they need to. Once they're ready, then they estimate silently. So this is another example of working together alone. So once everybody has estimated, they're keeping their cards close to their chest, literally. And once everybody's ready, they reveal their estimates simultaneously. What this does is prevents bias. If I have Jiva who goes first and declares that it's a 5, I thought it was a 2, and now I feel embarrassed. And so if Jiva revealed his first, his 5 might influence my estimate. And I'll just go copy Jiva and I'll estimate 5 as well. So by estimating silently, simultaneously revealing those estimates eliminates that bias. Then we can discuss why Jiva thought it was a 5 and why somebody else thought it was a 1. Maybe Jiva forgot about included some testing scenarios that the person who thought it was a 1 hadn't considered. That's also where we get these diverse perspectives playing a part as well. Some teams playing planning poker can get bogged down and spend 15 or 20 minutes per story. You do need a good facilitator to keep things moving, to time box your discussion, and to keep tight rein on the facilitation. So get a good scrum master. I find that's a challenge. Planning poker works well when you've got just a few stories to estimate, 5 or 10 stories. I like to do it. We have backlog refinement workshops once or maybe even twice per sprint for an hour, maybe an hour and a half, where we're discussing all the new requirements. And we spend the last part of that workshop estimating those requirements that we just discussed while they're all fresh in our memory. So maybe a 1.5 hour bi-weekly backlog refinement session. We'd spend the last 20 or 30 minutes. Planning poker tools, you can use physical decks, like even just a regular set of playing cards, the ace, 2, 3, 5, and 8, for example. You might need more than one deck if you've got more than 4 people doing the estimation. You can get custom planning poker decks. Those were quite popular whenever people used to go to Scrum training in person, and part of your training fee would include planning poker deck. There's lots of apps available on the Apple App Store or Google Play Store. You could probably build one in Power Apps if you've got spare time at the weekend. I've used the calculator app on my phone. When I'm stuck in a pinch, I just type the number in and then reveal it when I'm all ready to reveal our estimates. Probably the best thing to do is to find a planning poker app that integrates with Azure DevOps or Jira, depending on whatever backlog management tool that you're using, so that you can all see the card, and then when you reach consensus, that consensus estimate is entered straight into Azure DevOps or Jira. So now you've got 2 estimation methods. For estimating your backlog, you've got whatever it is, 20 or 30 user stories all estimated. How do we figure out how long it's going to take? Now that we know the relative size of all the stories in the backlog. So this method works well for estimating a couple of dozen items. If you're going to estimate an entire project, you probably want to stick at that feature or epic level, and there's information about that in my section 4 of my course. But this method's good enough if we're just going to estimate small user stories that are coming up in the next couple of months, maybe for the next release. What we're going to do to figure out how long it's going to take is take the top 10 user stories in that backlog that have all been estimated. We're going to try and pick 10 that are related to each other. So maybe they're part of the same epic or same component. That works better than 10 completely unrelated user stories. Question is, does your team feel like they could get those 10 done in one sprint? To find out, I like to play a game called Fist of Five. So we start out with 0 fingers showing, which means I don't think we've got any chance on earth of getting all those 10 done in one sprint. In that case, so we play Fist of Five, everybody reveals their confidence level. 5, absolutely, no problem. We'd do that every day of the week. 4, yeah, pretty good chance, and so on down to 0, which means no hope. If you've got 4 or 5 fingers showing, that's great. So your team, everybody's confident that you can get 10 stories done. Add another small story on, make it 11. Play Fist of Five again. Do we think we can get 11 done? Yeah, we do. Okay, great. Everybody's still showing 4 or 5 fingers. Add another card on. Got 12 now. Once people start showing 2 and 3 fingers, then it's time to go back to that previous number of user stories. On the other hand, if you start with 10 and you get 2s and 3s, well, you take one off and go with 9. Eventually, what you're going to find is you reach consensus around how many of those user stories you think you can get done in one sprint. For an example, we have 45 user stories in the backlog. They are in the estimation range of 1 to 8 story points. The total for the 45 is 125 points. The team playing Fist of Five agreed that they thought they could get the first 9 stories done. Those 9 stories had a total of 25 points. To figure out how long, well, you just take that estimated velocity, 25 points, and you take the entire backlog of 125, divide by your velocity, and you get 5 sprints. So distance divided by velocity equals time. If you remember your high school physics, that's all we've done. The math really isn't complicated. 5 2-week sprints is 10 weeks. So some of your stakeholders will know that you're proposing to run 2-week sprints. Great. Others don't really know what a sprint is. You might need to convert it back to weeks for them. So when your product owner asks, how long is it going to take? You can confidently say, based on the estimated risk-adjusted size of the requirements, the amount of work we could complete in an average 2-week sprint, we reckon it's going to take 5 2-week sprints, which is 10 elapsed weeks to complete. So a quick recap of what we've managed to do. We've agreed our standard story. We have used affinity estimation or planning poker to estimate our backlog. We've estimated our velocity and used the Fist of Five game to reach consensus. And then we have taken that estimated backlog and derived the duration from it. That's all there is to story point estimation. If you'd like to learn more, you can join my course. There's a free plan, a recap of almost everything we've covered in the session today. The paid plan goes into more advanced content like estimating projects, deriving the costs, visualizing the estimates, and then using those visuals, particularly in sales proposals. And then section 5 is going to be frequently asked questions and advanced topics as well. There's a pre-release plan that's available at the moment for $47. But just for attending the New Zealand Business Apps Summit, you can get $47 off. So effectively, you're getting the pre-release plan for free. It's available first 10 registrations. So go and visit customery.academy/NZBAS and sign up for that. I've been Neil Benson. It's been my pleasure to join you at the New Zealand Business Apps Summit. Thanks so much for letting me in. If you want to keep in touch, I'd love to hear from you. If you've got any questions about estimating business applications, you never know, you might just appear on a future episode of Amazing Apps, either as a workshop, a coaching session with you, or I'll take your question and answer it on a future podcast episode. That's all from me. Remember to keep sprinting and enjoy the rest of your summit. Thanks so much. Happy to take any questions, but I appreciate we're probably pretty close to time. Jiva, how are we doing?
Jiva is off for some other meeting, so I'm just taking the race.
I lost him.
Yeah, nice session, Neil. Thanks for presenting at the Business Application Summit.
All right, everybody. Thanks so much and enjoy the rest of Business Apps Summit and hope to see you soon, maybe in person next year.
Yeah, hopefully. Okay. Thanks, Neil. See ya. Bye.